Welcome to today's webinar on Oracle Business Suite Web Security Vulnerabilities Examined. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrity, and I'll be the moderator for this e-learning session. The speaker today is Stephen Coast. Steve is a Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrity Corporation. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994, and for the past 12 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle Business Suite and Oracle databases, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OEUG, IOUG, and the National Collaborative Conferences. Steve is recognized internationally for his vast security knowledge and expertise. I'll now turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Today's topic is looking at web security vulnerabilities within the Oracle Business Suite. So we're going to go through and examine some of these web security vulnerabilities that exist in the Oracle Business Suite in detail, and I'll actually demonstrate a couple of vulnerabilities. So we'll first talk about the Oracle Business Suite in general, talk about it as being an web application. A lot of people think it's an ERP application, but it's actually one of the largest web applications in the world. Then we'll start looking at web application security. Kind of what does web application security mean? So words like SQL injection, cross-site scripting we'll delve into. Then we'll actually jump into a bunch of web application vulnerabilities in the Oracle Business Suite, and I'll actually demonstrate a couple of them and actually show you how they operate, what's happening, and we'll actually go into code and see where it happened in the code and why it's such a security risk in the Oracle Business Suite environment. Then finally we'll wrap it up and talk about the Oracle Business Suite DMZ implementation that will help you actually mitigate some of these vulnerabilities, but not all of them. And then we'll open up some Q&A at the end. Before we get started, let's a little brief background about Integrity. Integrity was founded in 2001, and we specialize in Oracle Business Suite and Oracle Database Security. We have two sides to the business. We do have a set of products, one being AppSentry that does a detailed and comprehensive validation of the security of Oracle Business Suite. So it goes through both the application, database, and application server to verify that it's configured correctly, no default passwords, security patches are applied, and things like that. We also have AppDefend, which is an application firewall which actually protects against many of the security vulnerabilities we'll talk about today. So AppDefend provides virtual patching, so if there is a security bug in Oracle Business Suite, either known or unknown, AppDefend can actually block that and protect your Oracle Business Suite environment both externally and internally. And then we get a lot of questions, how do you know so much about the Oracle Business Suite? So Integrity does a lot of research and development. We spend a lot of time working with Oracle to fix security bugs. Integrity helped Oracle write their secure configuration guide for the Oracle Business Suite. And we work on-site for clients quite a bit of the time. So we do on-site security assessments. We work with a lot of clients who have PCI compliance issues, SOX compliance issues. We do a lot of security design services around the Oracle Business Suite, Oracle Database, helping implement tools like Audit Vault, Database Vault, Imperva, Guardium, Oracle Transparent Data Encryption. So we do work a lot and very closely with many different customers who have implemented Oracle products. So enough about Integrity. That was just a brief background. Let's kind of start talking about Oracle Business Suite Web Application Security bugs. So before we get started, let's talk about the Oracle Business Suite as a web application. You may think of it as an ERP application, but it's really the core components of it is a very large web application. So if we look at the Oracle Business Suite Release 12 architecture, it's running on an Oracle Application Server 10G, and there's a number of different web application frameworks implemented to implement the application. So there's something called Java Server Pages, and there's about 8,000 Java Server Pages in the application. OA Framework is the Oracle Applications Framework, which is a robust web application framework developed by Oracle, and there's about 11 to 12,000 OA Framework pages. And then there's a couple other technologies used within the Oracle Business Suite web application, one being servlets and then also web services. So there's many different things going on within the application. One key piece of information to know for the Oracle Business Suite is when you install Oracle applications, you get all 250 modules. So if you're running General Ledger and AR and AP maybe, you're also running Oracle Student System, Oracle HR, Oracle Manufacturing, Oracle CRM, because when Oracle installs, it installs every single module by default, and there's no way to change that. So everyone on this call today who has an Oracle Business Suite environment, you have 20,000 plus web pages that just means there's a lot of surface area. There's a lot of potential issues for the application. Another thing to keep in mind is when the application runs, this is all running as a single database account called apps. So if there's any kind of security issue, security weakness, security misconfiguration, security bug, which we'll be talking about mostly today, it's using the apps database account that has access to all the data, read, write, and can do whatever it wants. So if there's any little issue in the application, you can very quickly escalate your privileges. You can do things very powerful in the application. And we'll actually demonstrate that very clearly in a few minutes. So that was the release 12 architecture. Well, there was also release 11i that many people are running. Looking through the survey that you completed to join the webinar, a number of you are running 11i. So 11i is a little bit older architecture. So it's very similar, but the mixture of the different pages is slightly different. One huge difference is there is a component called mod.plsql within 11i that was removed in R12. Mod.plsql actually is a web application framework that uses database packages to generate web pages. So there's about 850 pages there, and I'll actually show you a vulnerability in one and show you how it works behind the scenes in Oracle. And 11i works the exact same way as R12. Again, all 250 modules are installed, so you've got, no matter what you're doing, you've got 20,000 plus web pages running in your environment. And so you always have to keep that into account, that 20,000 web pages, someone's just looking for one or two security vulnerabilities to potentially take over the entire environment. And when you've got 20,000 of something, you've always got a problem. There's a large surface area. And some of the things we'll talk about at the end of the call is how do you reduce that surface area? How do you protect the application by making sure people just can't access 20,000 things? If you're only running iSupplier on the internet, you need only 10 or 20 pages, not 20,000. That's a 1 to 1,000 reduction in the number of pages potentially. So for the people today who are still running 11i on the call, 11i also has a few very interesting issues because it's a very old application. And when we start talking about the web application components within the Oracle Business Suite in an 11i environment, these have been mostly upgraded in R12. Well, the application server that 11i uses, which you cannot upgrade, is still 9IAS. That was desupported over 10 years ago. So Oracle does provide some minor patching. A couple security fixes have been done over time. But again, it's a very, very old application server. It's not implementing robust, modern protocols. Modern security audits aren't being done on it. So it's a fairly significantly risk here that you're running a very old component. And it even gets worse. Mod.plsql was removed in R12 because of the security ramifications of it. It just wasn't designed to be a secure method of calling database packages to create web pages. The Apache version within 11i is 1.3.19. This was released in 2001, so this is a 15-year-old web server. Oracle did provide a few security fixes to it, but again, if you talk to your security team and you say, oh, we're running a 15-year-old web server, is that a problem? They'll probably be like, what the hell are you doing? The JServe is the Java component that actually a lot of the web pages run in. So JServe is used to run Java server pages, the OA framework, the Java servlets here. That was released in 1999 and has not been updated since at all. The Oracle Forms are running via 8.06.3. I don't know if anyone even on the call ever did anything with the Oracle database 8.06. But that's how old. That's from the 1990s also. So it's a very old architecture. There are still a lot of people running 11i, but as you think about security and the Oracle Business Suite, you do have to start taking this into account that these old versions, not only there may be a security vulnerability, there's weaknesses within the overall 11i architecture. R12 is much better, but again, unless you've now moved up to 12.2, 12.1 and 12.0 are starting to age and show their age also. Where 12.2 now runs the WebLogic, which is a much better, much more modern, robust web application server. The older R12, 12.0, 12.1 are still running a dated Oracle Application Server 10G. It's much newer than the 11i one, but it is not as robust and powerful and secure as the WebLogic that you can find in 12.2. So that's kind of a background about Oracle Business Suite, talking about it as a web application. So now let's delve into web application security a little bit. When we talk about web application security, what do we mean? What's the definition of it? Well, it's just trying to take your web application and make it secure. And there are a couple of organizations that have done a very good job about actually quantifying out what does web application security mean, what are the issues, what can be broken, and where are the major issues, and what should you be thinking about. The Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP, is a volunteer organization of security professionals around the world and web application developers who have thought through this and said, okay, on the top 10 issues that you can find from a security perspective in a web application, what are they? And they've actually published a very good document that's very detailed that now talks about things like SQL injection, authentication and session management, cross-site scripting, sensitive data exposure, security misconfigurations. And so they've actually gone through and quantified these. And so what Integrity's done is taken some of these frameworks and now mapped it to the Oracle Business Suite. What should we be concerned about in the Oracle Business Suite? Where are there potential issues? Another organization, the Web Application Security Consortium, has done this very similar thing and to a little bit more detail. So they've gone through every possible issue that you could find in web applications and from a security perspective, and where are these threats? How do you organize them? How do you think about them? What are the different types? And how should you look for them within the application? So Integrity spends a lot of time going through the Oracle Business Suite. A lot of the Oracle Business Suite vulnerabilities fixed are actually identified by Integrity reported to Oracle. So in the January 2016 CPU, Integrity found over 40 different web security vulnerabilities. So let's talk about some of these in a little bit more detail. So when we start talking about SQL injection, this is probably the most significant security issue within the Oracle Business Suite. SQL injection means that I can actually connect to the web application, add a little bit of information, and now that security vulnerability, that SQL, is actually executed in the database as the apps user. And again, the major issue with the Oracle Business Suite is that everything executes as the apps user. The apps user is all powerful, has godlike privileges in the database, at least DBA level, if not more. It owns all the data. It can execute all the packages. It can create users, change passwords. It can do quite a bit. And so within the web application, if I have the URL in my browser, if there's a security vulnerability that's a SQL injection vulnerability, I can basically start adding in SQL statements, and it's really fragments of SQL statements that then will be executed when the statement's executed in code. In this case, if you look at the red here, this is an older vulnerability that was fixed a number of years ago, but is a great demonstration and highlights SQL injection very well. That basically I'm allowed to call the FND user package update user. In this case, I can just change any Oracle Business Suite application user's password. So what will happen is when I access this URL, instead of actually accessing the online help, it'll access the online help and then also append and execute the fragment in red, which is basically a function call, and it'll actually update the operations user and change the operations user's password to welcome1. Now I can actually just go in as the operations user, or maybe sysadmin, or whatever I want to do, is just pick a user, and I can now go in to that user. From an internal audit perspective, now I've just circumvented any application security controls. So they may be very proud of the application controls, but now if I can go change any user's password I want, I can basically go into any user I want and do whatever I want. So this is an example of SQL injection, why it's very powerful. Again, this is being executed as the apps user. I've got a browser, I can point to the application, and so this will work either internally or externally. So someone potentially in Romania can connect to your iSupplier URL, and potentially, if there's a vulnerability there, and we'll actually demonstrate in a few minutes, I can now start doing things in your database and potentially steal data, delete data, change data, update bank account numbers, things like that. So next time you run a payroll run, it'll actually start depositing into my account than your employees' accounts, things like that. So that's why these vulnerabilities are so powerful. Another major category of security vulnerabilities is cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is very powerful if I start thinking about Amazon, eBay, your bank. In an Oracle Business Suite environment, it would be pretty tough to actually do something that was really meaningful here in terms of a cross-site scripting attack. But there's some examples. I would have to spend a little bit of time going against your environment, and I could probably get some information. I could probably do some powerful things, maybe even change your own password. So the example is you've got iRecruitment running, and there's a field in iRecruitment that has like an application job description, or you're putting in some information about your candidacy that you want to apply for a job at the company. What the attacker does is they put some JavaScript in. So JavaScript is what makes the internet work well and web pages look powerful and flashy and things like that. But what the attacker can do is add a little bit of JavaScript, and so then when the HR manager is reviewing the job application, behind the scenes, really without the HR manager knowing it's happening, it actually starts executing some URLs on the HR manager's browser. And where this becomes very powerful is that, well, that HR manager signed into Oracle Business Suite. So now I could actually potentially call an Oracle Business Suite URL that would maybe update my salary, double my salary if it was an internal attack, maybe change that HR manager's password. Again, this is a very targeted attack, and I need a little bit of interaction with somebody to actually open up my job application, but it becomes very powerful. Again, these are very targeted attacks against Oracle Business Suite. It wouldn't be very much a generic attack. Against Amazon and eBay, these are very powerful and can do a lot of damage. In an Oracle Business Suite environment, we tend to put these as low or medium risks, where previously the SQL injection risk we put as extremely high. So it's very important. So there's a little bit of a difference there between the two environments, or two different types of attacks. One major issue with cross-site scripting is, and why it's so hard to prevent, is it's very, very robust in terms of what you can do. So every line on this page now is basically doing just about the same thing. But as you can see, I can just change it around. And what I'm doing is just passing in JavaScript. So it's basically little teeny lines of code. Again, these aren't really doing much. They're just trying to splash up an alert on the screen as a demonstration. But as you can see, they're all very, very different, even though they're all doing the same thing. And that's one reason why web application security attacks, including SQL injection, cross-site scripting, are very difficult to block effectively, because look at all the different ways I can do it. It's just like SQL. When I write a SQL statement, I can do a lot of different things in a SQL statement. For anyone on the call who really wants to spend a little bit more time looking at cross-site scripting, there are some good references on the internet. Again, OWASP we talked about has very detailed information. They spend a lot of time researching, talking about these type of attacks. So now let's kind of meld Oracle Business Suite and Web Application Security together and kind of what some of the issues are. So if we start looking at the Oracle Business Suite specifically in terms of Web Application Security bugs, between January 2005 and April 2016, there was over 400 security bugs fixed in Oracle Business Suite. That's a large number. So any one of these bugs potentially can compromise your entire environment. So now if we take that 416 number and try to break it out a little bit, about 120 were SQL injection vulnerabilities. So these are the highest risk. To us, a SQL injection vulnerability in any web page can basically compromise the entire environment. So we'd put all those SQL injection vulnerabilities as high risk to very high risk. Cross-site scripting, there's about 105. Those would be low to medium risk. Authorization authentication issues, these are ones that I can potentially bypass the sign-on screen and access data. I can potentially access somebody else's account that I'm not authorized to. So there's been about 35 of those. And then there's been about 20 business logic issues that I can basically circumvent something. I can maybe do something I'm not supposed to. I can actually access other people's pages, things like that. And so if you notice, those don't add up to 400. There's a bunch of different categories, as we saw on the previous screen with the WASC listing. There's many different types of web security vulnerabilities. I just picked some of the biggest categories here. But again, the SQL injection ones are the highest risk. Those are the ones we tend to concentrate on. So now if we take the OWASP Top 10 mapping and look at Oracle Business Suite specifically, and as you can see, injection is probably our biggest risk. Again, SQL injection is very high risk. A4 is insecure direct object references. that means there's pages that I can access directly. So if you're going through the workflow of the web application in eBusiness Suite, so it takes you from page to page to page. Well, there's actually a lot of vulnerabilities in Oracle Business Suite that's been fixed over time. So if you've got 5 different pages, well, it expects you to go through all 5, but there's been a lot of issues that I could just access page number 5 right away and potentially not be authenticated, not be supposed to be able to do that, or there's actually no security on that page. It's because the developer said, oh, you're supposed to go through page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they expect you to start at 1. And they check your security at page 1. They don't check your security at page 5. So if I just go to page 5 directly, I can potentially see data. I can potentially do things I'm not allowed to. Security misconfigurations are another area that are potentially issues that the application is not locked down by default. So Oracle Business Suite, even if you install 12.2 today, there are things you need to do to the application. And especially in the DMZ environment, Oracle's got a 30-page document that if you want to deploy Oracle Business Suite to the DMZ, to the internet, like iSupply or iStore, iRecruitment, you have to do a lot of very specific configuration to make it secure. A9, using known vulnerable components. Again, if you're running 11i, your technology stack is 10 to 15 years old at least. So again, these are potentially very vulnerable components that have not been patched, have not been updated, or are not the most secure. So these are things you need to be thinking about. Again, now if we take the same mapping and do it to the WASC, Web Application Security Threats, some of these are bigger issues than others. You'll see ones on here like XML, entity injection. So there's other things that you need to think about because Oracle Business Suite's added things like web services in. Now that's another attack vector that someone can access if it's not configured correctly. So that's kind of looking at web application security vulnerabilities. There is another issue that you have to start thinking about for Oracle Business Suite. Oracle Business Suite does fix these security bugs as reported to Oracle, and they fix them through the process of the critical patch updates. Well, you may not be able to apply critical patch updates for a number of reasons. So you may have open web security vulnerabilities in your environment because you're not applying security patches either on a regular basis or you can't. One of the reasons you can apply security patches is because you're no longer supported by Oracle. So the Oracle support model is Premier support, extended support, and sustaining support. If you're under sustaining support, you do not have security patches anymore. And that's very important. So when we talk about web security vulnerabilities, these are in your environment unpatched, and there's not much you can do about it. And we'll talk about some potential ways that you can fix that in a little bit. So if you are running Oracle Business Suite 12.2 or 12.1, those are fully supported today. 12.1 is supported through October 2021 for critical patch updates and security patches. As of today, there are no other supported versions for critical patch updates. So if you're running 12.0, CPU support ended 2015. If you're running 11i, support ended January 2016. It was the last CPU unless you have an advanced support contract, which is fairly expensive, in order to get CPUs, and those will only be supported through January 2017. So if you are running an older version and have not yet upgraded, you have a potential additional risk in your environment that you can't even apply these CPUs that are fixing the bugs that we'll talk about in a few minutes. So even if you are supported, there are other organizations. We do a lot of security assessments on site at clients. And so we do get into the case where we start talking to the client and, well, we can't apply CPUs because we're not on the extended support minimum baseline. So even though you are on a certain version, Oracle says you have to be up to a certain point in terms of the technology stack. So even if you're running 12.1, you can still apply security patches, but you basically have to be on 12.1.3 in order to do that. We were working with a client recently that they were stuck on 12.1.2 for a bunch of internal business reasons. They could not upgrade and apply the necessary patches to get to 12.1.3 in order to apply CPUs. So they basically have not been applying CPUs for the last year, and we had to spend a lot of time working on a remediation strategy for them on how to secure their environment even though they're not applying security patches. And again, 11.5.10, 12.0 had pretty rigorous baselines that while they were supported, so you may even be farther behind than just those dates that, like January 2016 was the last 11i CPU patch. So there are multiple reasons why organizations can't apply the security patches in order to fix the bugs we're going to be talking about in a couple minutes. And so this is a nice chart that actually shows you if you do get behind. So let's say you're a 12.0 customer, and if you look down at the purple line in the lower right-hand corner, so the last CPU for 12.0 was January 2015. So if you have not applied CPU patches since January 2015, you've got 57 open web application security bugs in your environment. If you're 11.5.9 and haven't applied them in 6 years, you've got 208. The key here is just one of these can be bad. So 57 is horrible. Well, just 2 or 3 could be really bad. And so it's just your risk just escalates every single day as new CPUs come out, new security bugs are identified. For the Oracle E-Business Suite does have some inherent risks. It is a packaged software. So again, here's another issue why the security bugs do become an issue. Web vulnerabilities become a major issue in the environment. If you have a custom application, like you wrote your own internal web application, now it's deployed to the internet, well, an attacker doesn't know much about that. They have to kind of probe and check around and look at it. The thing with Oracle E-Business Suite is an attacker can download it from the internet, install it, play with it all day, figure out where all the vulnerabilities are, and then go figure out that you're running Oracle E-Business Suite and do one URL and basically take over your entire environment. So this is a little bit different. There's not a lot of heads-up warning that somebody's coming at you because they can just connect to iRecruitment. Oh, that's Oracle E-Business Suite. We know how to attack that, and they do a bunch of research. They play around offline. They're not even connecting to your environment. They figure out the exact couple of attacks that they want to do, and it's game over for you. Because a couple of SQL injection attacks, it's as the apps, they can basically potentially download all your social security numbers. They can basically wipe out the entire environment. There's a lot of different things they can do, and so it's very easy for an attacker. They do have to learn about Oracle Business Suite, but they don't have to spend time on your system figuring it out. They can basically do it offline. They can just Google. If you just go in and Google Oracle Business Suite exploit, there's websites out there that contain these exploits. There's people who publish out detailed information, and that's all they need, and now they can kind of come right after you and go against a bunch of other organizations at the same time. And this happens. It's not a lot of the attacks that we see that occur against organizations, we can basically trace them back to some website that somebody published out the exact details, and it was all out there, and somebody copied and pasted it. So that's a little bit of background. That's kind of talking about why these vulnerabilities are bad, why they may be in your environment. So let's actually examine a couple of vulnerabilities now. So I'll actually pick off some vulnerabilities from the January 2016 CPU. So again, there were 70 different vulnerabilities patched as part of the January 2016 CPU. Again, this is a very large CPU. Integrity found 40 of the 70. And I'm only going to demonstrate vulnerabilities here that have actually been published out. So detailed information about these security vulnerabilities have been published, so this is not new information. All I'm going to do is actually show you how it works. We, again, want to protect our clients as much as possible, that we don't publish out any information of the security vulnerabilities that are discovered by Integrity. So these are vulnerabilities that are already out there, already out in the wild. Fortunately, we've not seen this one actually used to exploit a client yet, but the information is out there and it's very easy to do. This is the exact information that comes out in the Oracle Advisory. So again, in the upper left-hand corner is the vulnerability number. So that's the CV numbers, 2016-0545. If you just search for that number, you can actually find more information about this vulnerability. Just type that number into Google, lots of information will pop up. This was in Customer Intelligence. The protocol, it's HTTP. That means it can be used via web browser. If you're running SSL, it can also be fully exploited. There's really no difference there. The one key piece of information here is this column, remotely exploitable without authentication. That means I do not need to be signed into the Oracle Business Suite. As long as I can connect to your environment and just see the URL, so let's say iSupplier, iRecruitment, iStore, I can fully take advantage of this. I don't need an account. And if you look at the two items in red there, partial plus, this means I can start executing any code I want as the apps user. So again, very powerful. So when you look under the confidentiality and integrity columns, partial plus means I can see the entire database. I can see everything. I can execute anything I want as the apps user. Then the last column there, last affected patch set, I've highlighted 12.0 there. That piece of information is not in the Oracle advisory, because as in January 2016, 12.0 is not supported by the CPU process. So Oracle doesn't even include that information. In this case, this vulnerability is still exploitable in 12.0 even though Oracle didn't list it. So it's always key to understand that even though you're looking at a recent advisory that says, oh, it's just 12.1, 12.2, older versions most likely are still impacted. So even if you're unsupported by Oracle, these vulnerabilities are still piling up and still fully exploitable in your environment. So we'll actually kind of pop out now and actually show you this vulnerability in action. So hopefully this is readable on everyone's screen. So basically this is the vulnerable web page right here. So it's this BIC CFG-D2 JSP page. And the vulnerability is actually in the delete parameter. And so now there's many different things I can do. So what I'm doing is basically just %27 here is just an apostrophe, and the pipe is a standard SQL pipe. So someone screwed up at Oracle coding, and they actually just had a dynamic SQL statement, and I'll show you the actual code in a second. And so all I'm doing is just completing their SQL statement. I'm just basically saying, okay, they were enclosing something in 2 single quotes. All I'm doing is ending that single quote, doing a standard SQL concatenation, and now this piece of the statement, I can do anything I want. I can basically execute any SQL that I want, and this will get executed as the apps user. This is one of the sample SQL statements we use in order to demonstrate vulnerabilities, and this is a standard Oracle database function call, util HTTP request. And this is just a very easy way for us to validate a security vulnerability. I could now go call other functions. I could basically potentially put in partial SQL statements. Again, it depends on what SQL statement this gets appended to. In this case, this is just calling out using util HTTP to call out to a URL, and that tells us that the vulnerability was actually triggered. I don't want to give too much information to somebody to actually just use this to actually attack someone. But again, this is just for us validating. So all I have to do is just basically copy this out, and I will go paste it into, I'll start up a browser here, and I'll paste this in. And what's very interesting to see here is when this goes up, see how it returned me to the login page. Oh, that didn't work, right? It actually worked because the vulnerability was before the authentication in the page. So when you saw that this is remotely exploitable without authentication, you might say, oh, wait, no, it actually is asking you for authentication. In Oracle Business Suite Web Application Security vulnerabilities, most often the vulnerability exists before any authentication checks occur or actually validation of your responsibility or anything like that. So in this case, this vulnerability was actually executed before it said, oh, you don't have authorization to access this page, and redirected me. And because I was calling out to that web page, what we'll do here is go in, and I'll actually go in. And so what it was doing was it actually accessed a web server, and then it told us, and then we can go check the web server log and to actually tell us if it was actually executed. And in this case, I can go in, and what it's doing here is, you'll see it happening many times. So this is basically just our test string that we passed in, and this was our validation. But again, I could do many different things in the Oracle Business Suite. And this statement is actually getting executed over and over and over. So every single row that the SQL statement was getting executed for, it was actually calling out to this URL. So there's many, many, many cases of it in this. And again, this is just a test validation. We don't want to give out too much information to someone so they could quickly exploit this in your environment. But this is a sample of how we do our validation behind the scenes. But again, it was very clearly triggered that it was calling out util HTTP request. It was requesting a web page against that server, and then was just using this string. And this is how we do it internally to actually test the validation. So what's happening in Oracle Business Suite? Why did this work? What was happening? So now if we actually go out and look at the code, this is actually the web page. So JSP pages within the Oracle Business Suite are clear text. So you can actually pull up any of these JSP pages and start looking through them. So here's our page we were looking at. So we were just calling this page OAHTML/this page name. And it's very interesting to see, look at here, this page is 12 years old. So this was the page that then recently got updated. So this was a fairly robust, updated Oracle Business Suite 12.1.3 environment. And this page is from 2004. This page most likely is not being used. So this is that surface area. When we're talking about 20,000 web pages, our phrase for Oracle is a web page in, a web page never deleted. So Oracle Business Suite doesn't remove unused pages. If there's a security vulnerability or something like that, they do actually stub it out. So they actually keep the file there, but they actually just blank it out. They remove all the code out of it. So even if a web page exists, Oracle says, oh, that's no longer needed. They never remove it. So that's why this surface area is such a problem, that you've got old web pages. And this happens even between 11i and R12. They don't go through and figure out exactly in R12 when they do a massive upgrade like that exactly which pages are used and not used. They leave most of them in unless it's a large set of modules. So between 11i and R12 they deleted a bunch of modules, but they did not go through business. In this case, this is customer intelligence. They did not go through customer intelligence and say, oh, ooh, these 5 pages weren't used. The whole module is still used, but these 5 pages weren't. They don't do that. So as you can see, this was a very old page. And so now we're looking through actually JSP code. And as you can see, all it's doing right here is doing a request get parameter. So it's actually pulling that parameter in. And it was a delete parameter. And then we go through some other lines of code. And it's basically getting appended to a SQL statement here. And so these cases here, and there's actually a couple SQL injection vulnerabilities here. And as you can see, they're taking that delete parameter and actually transferring it to another variable. But now this variable is actually now used in this SQL statement, in this where clause. And this is a classic SQL injection vulnerability. So this, now you can see what was happening, that it's basically going through and making a list and now appending it to a SQL statement. And so I can basically have full control to append to the SQL statement and now execute SQL as and it will get executed as the apps user. So this is a classic Oracle Business Suite SQL injection bug. There's been over 100 of these, and there's more to be found. Integrity's got right now about 20 different security vulnerabilities open with Oracle that are not yet fixed. They'll be fixed in the next couple of CPUs. But again, this is how it's happening, and someone at Oracle screwed up in the coding process that basically just passed in this. And this should have been bind variables. So the way this is fixed is somebody at Oracle will say, as soon as it's reported to them, will say, oh, we should use the bind variable. They'll go and change this to a bind variable and issue a critical patch update, and that's how it's fixed. But this is what's happening behind the scenes. This is why this is working. So that's a SQL injection bug at a very high level. Again, there's many of these over time, and they're very powerful and very damaging to the environment. And again, this was remotely exploitable without authentication. It happened before there was any check to see if I'm logged in, if I've got the right responsibility, if I can actually access that page or anything. So that's the first major category. The second major category that you'll hear about is cross-site scripting. So cross-site scripting, as we went through that previous example, lets me execute something in the browser, in the context of the user's browser. And in Oracle Business Suite, all I do is probably call another web page within the Oracle Business Suite to maybe like change your password or update a bank account number or something like that, or double my salary. We've demonstrated the double my salary before. That's actually pretty effective. Little trick, as long as you send it to your boss or your HR manager or somebody who has authority to double your salary, but it works quite well. So cross-site scripting, very similar. Again, I've got a URL. I'm not having to do anything super complex. All I'm doing is going in, and I've got a URL here, and this one is an 11i, and all I'm doing is now passing in a little convoluted string, but there's websites that detail these out. And the classic one is just alert a script, and I just then call another URL. This is actually a 11i in a modpl SQL, and I'll show you how modpl SQL works here. So if I just now go into my browser, instead of that other page, I just paste this in. What will happen is it'll just pop up XXS. This is how you test for cross-site scripting. I don't necessarily have to make a true exploit. This tells me that I put this URL in and I got somebody to click on it, and it just pops up XXS. And this can either be embedded in data. So again, the HR manager that you're using iRecruitment, somebody can put this into a potential iRecruitment field if it's vulnerable, if Oracle is not doing proper validations behind the scenes. As soon as someone accesses that page, then it would do something. Instead of popping up a little box here that says cross-site scripting, it would basically change my password, redirect me to a malicious site so I could download malware to their machine, things like that. In the Oracle Business Suite environment, cross-site scripting is powerful, but it's not like it's an Amazon, eBay, or your bank. You really have to think about what you're doing in an Oracle Business Suite environment, spend a lot of time, and probably an attacker would just go after the SQL injection attack way before they went with a cross-site scripting attack. But again, these are many of the types of vulnerabilities that are patched, and that's the reason I'm demonstrating it. So again, what's happening behind the scenes? Well, when we talk about mod.pl SQL, if we look at the URL again, whenever you see a URL in 11i that's PLS, that's basically a mod.pl SQL. And then it's actually the instance name. So in this case, our database instance pat 115. And what it's doing is it's actually calling a database package. And that's the database package name. And then it's also calling a procedure within the database package. And then in this case, I'm just passing in a parameter. And so what's going on is this actually calls the database. And there's a web module within Apache that then calls a database, and it first calls FND enabled PL SQL, and so it checks this table to see if this package is actually enabled. And so it checks this table, and in this case it was ARW utilities, and so it checks if that name exists and if this enabled flag is yes. So there's about 800 of these in this table, and then it actually calls this package. And if we go into the package, you'll actually see a procedure down here somewhere called no tab container title. And so I'm just calling this package this procedure and passing in the parameter ptitle. And fundamentally what cross-site scripting is if I pass something into a web page, if it gets echoed back to me, if it's returned to me in the web page without without being sanitized properly or validation, that's a cross-site scripting attack. In this case, I pass in ptitle, and here it's just basically checking ptitle. And the fix for Oracle on this is they just make another parameter call. They make a little call here to a function that strips out any HTML, any cross-site scripting attacks that are passed in. But basically that's the vulnerability. So now I can basically maybe if I was phishing attack, I would actually send this URL to somebody in an email, have them click on it. Since we're logged into Oracle Business Suite, it would actually do something to Oracle Business Suite. Or it would actually then return them to a malicious website that could potentially download a malicious piece of code down to their browser, maybe take over their browser in a classic phishing attack. But basically that's what is happening behind the scenes here. That's a classic cross-site scripting attack. That's a classic right here. Somebody at Oracle screwed up and didn't put the proper sanitization of this parameter, and it just got written back out to the page. Therefore, that's the vulnerability. So that's a high-level description of a SQL injection vulnerability and a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Again, there's a lot of different vulnerabilities in the Oracle Business Suite that can happen. I kind of went through the January 2016 CPU and picked out a couple that were meaningful. So the first one here, 2016-0525, is a SQL injection vulnerability. And the way the Java server pages work is very interesting, that you can include Java server pages within Java server pages. So if you have a module in this case, universal work queue, I'm constantly writing out the same headers and footers and things like that. So you don't want to duplicate that. So they put those things in common pages, and then those are included in other pages. So in this case, there's 70 different IEU JSP pages. Well, the vulnerability is in just one page, but any of those 70 pages that I call can be exploited. So even though there's one little bug, it can cascade to many, many different pages. So that's, again, a SQL injection vulnerability that we demonstrated previously that's in many different pages, even though it's in a common page. Oracle just had to fix one file, and it fixed it in many different places. Second one here is arbitrary file access. Integrity found about 15 of these different vulnerabilities over time in Oracle Business Suite. So vulnerability 2016-0553, it allows me to read and write files to the application server. In this case, this is only a read one, but we have found other ones that we can actually read or write. So Oracle Business Suite's web application server is running. It's running probably as the Oracle or Apple Manager accounts. And oh, by the way, the web application server is running as that privilege. So I can actually potentially read any file that's owned by the Oracle server or has access to by the Oracle user on the Linux, Unix box, or Windows box. Again, there's files that have the app's password in them. You might have sensitive interface files running on this machine. So there's lots of different things I can do. I can just basically put in the path. The classic example is here. I can just, in a URL, I can put /etc/password and actually pull back your Linux password file. It doesn't have any meaningful information, but then I can see all your users. I can pull back. There's a couple files that have the app's password hard-coded in them in 11i. I can basically pull back your app's password. So it becomes very powerful. So that's another kind of class of attack. Here's another vulnerability that's in an XML component. So web services uses XML. XML is very powerful, and there's actually cases where there's a flaw within XML that allows me to actually access files on the operating system. And it's called an XML external entity attack. And so again, very detailed, very low level. The reason I included this one was, well, we're going to talk about the DMZ configuration. This is within iStore. So if you're running iStore on the internet, you're very vulnerable to this. Some of these other modules should be blocked, and we'll talk about how to block them in a few minutes. But again, this is a vulnerability that allows me to pull back arbitrary files or potentially access external entities. So I can actually use this to use your Oracle Business Suite environment to attack other sites. And those other sites will say, oh, your iStore is attacking us. And they might try to bring down your iStore, or it basically hides the identity of the attacker. So it becomes these can be very complex attacks, but it's very interesting what people can do and the creativity that's out there. Here's the final one, is unauthorized access to data. One of the fundamental problems, especially in 11i, it's been corrected mostly in the OA framework, but remember we talked about there's 5,000 to 8,000 Java server pages. Those 5,000 to 8,000 Java server pages within the Oracle Business Suite web application all have security individually defined. In the OA framework pages, it's defined globally. So OA framework has a design that says, well, if it's an OA framework page, security is automatically enabled and automatically checks it. But in those other individual Java server pages, each page has to handle security itself. And if the programmer screwed up and forgot to do the security checks, well, I can access whatever that page can offer me. And this is an example of it, that basically there's actually a security assignments page that the programmer forgot to put in that check to see if you're actually authorized, if you're signed into the application, and if you're authorized to access this page. And we found maybe 50 or 60 of these type of bugs over time, that basically you just type in the URL and you get access to the page and it just displays you data. You're not signed in or anything. And there's just a flaw, the programmer forgot to do it. That's why the OA framework, again, if you're running 12.2, every page is now OA framework. They've gotten rid of a lot of the JSP pages. But that changed dramatically from 11i, that there was like 8,000 of these. Now there's only like 2,000 or 3,000 in 12.2. That's why being on the latest version is very important, that Oracle has changed the way the web architectures work, made it much more robust, much more secure over time. So that's kind of some of the web vulnerabilities in detail. So just to give you enough, we're not going to go through every single one and show you how to exploit it or put out detailed exploit code out there, but it gives you an understanding on how powerful these are, how easy they are to exploit, and kind of why they happen behind the scenes in the code. So now let's talk about the DMZ implementation. So when you're talking about trying to fix these, what's the best thing to do? And when we look at an Oracle Business Suite environment, we look at external and internal. External is you're running iStore, iSupplier, iRecruitment on the internet. Oracle calls it the DMZ because you're actually deploying it to your demilitarized zone for your web application. Hopefully your organization has a good DMZ configuration. You should be deploying Oracle Business Suite into that. The key is that Oracle has a very, very detailed configuration for that. So if you're going to deploy externally a module like iStore, iSupplier, iRecruitment, iSupport, there's many others, you have to follow the directions in these two Metalink notes. There's one for release 12, there's one for 11i. And so these are helping you now try to overcome some limitations. It won't protect you against all these security vulnerabilities we're talking about, but at least it'll provide you some protection. And so in a DMZ environment, you're basically putting a reverse, hopefully doing it best practices, you're putting a reverse proxy, you're doing an external application server. We've got some clients that that are trying to just implement one Oracle Business Suite application server. Well, if you're doing external access, you need to have separate application servers, one external, one internal, and preferably more than one if you're doing redundancy and fault tolerance. And this is kind of the classic architecture. You should be running a reverse proxy. We strongly recommend something like a Blue Coat or an F5, something robust. But again, the reverse proxy should be what your organization is running. So hopefully in your DMZ, your organization is running something like an F5 Big IP device that's protecting all your web applications, not just Oracle Business Suite. And then having multiple layers of firewalls to protect each of these layers. So what is the Oracle DMZ configuration doing? So they've got those two documents. They go through in gory detail what you should be doing. What they're trying to do is actually limit the surface area. So again, you've got potentially 20,000 web pages running. You need to try to reduce that surface area as much as possible. And there's two ways they do that. One is they're running something called the URL firewall. And then two is you're running the node trust level. So the URL firewall tries to protect the JSP pages, tries to protect the servlets running, blocks Oracle forms and things like that. It's just a white list of different pages that can be allowed. The node trust level, because the OA framework is whenever you access an Oracle Business Suite page and you see in the URL it's oa.jsp or rf.jsp, that's OA framework. And so there's only one page, so you can't block OA.JSP, so they had to find up another way to do that, so they came up with something called node trust level. So you say, well, if I'm running iSupplier on the internet, I should not be able to come in as system administrator. I should only be able to come in as iSupplier users, and if you want to use system administrator, you have to either VPN in or be on the internal network. And that's what node trust level does. So if you're running on the internet in a DMZ configuration, you have to make sure that you're doing this correctly. The key for the URL firewall is it's protecting and limiting the surface area. I'm trying to reduce this 20,000 web pages as much as possible. The problem that we see for most clients is, well, if you look through the Oracle documents, it's URL firewall is in Appendix E, and there's no reference to say, oh yeah, you really should do this. This is like a mandatory step. Oracle doesn't say that. Well, Appendix E, implementing the URL firewall, is an absolute mandatory step. So if you have not implemented the URL firewall, and we do searches on the internet for clients, and we see about 50% of Oracle Business Suite environments on the internet do not have URL firewall implemented. That means you've got a large number of pages available, large surface area. There's security vulnerabilities in many of those pages, and this is just one way to reduce that exposure. And so again, this is just a white list of allowed pages. So if you're running iSupplier on the internet, you should only be running iSupplier on the internet, nothing else. Last piece here is on the DMZ configuration also. The DMZ is only certified for certain modules. So here's the list for R12. So you should not be running AR, AP, forms, things like that out on the internet. So Oracle's got a very detailed list of what's certified because they've spent extra time doing security audits and things like that. There's a couple issues here. One is for Oracle Business Suite, what I just talked about doesn't protect you if there's a security vulnerability. All they're trying to do is limit that surface area. They're trying to take 20,000 pages and make it a little bit better. Again, it's just lists of pages after pages. It's not that effective. And if there's a known bug, Oracle's response is, well, you have to apply the critical patch update. Well, many organizations aren't immediately applying those, are delayed, aren't supported. So you need to do some virtual patching. And there's two ways to do virtual patching in Oracle Business Suite environment. Is you either write your own rules and you try to reverse engineer and analyze each CPU, and then you have to either have a web application firewall tool like Imperva, the F5 can do it, or Oracle actually supplies Mod Security, which is a little web application firewall built into the e-business suite, but they don't provide you any rules, so you could write your own rules. For the recommended solution for virtual patching, the only solution available is Integrity's product AppDefend. So if you want to have a robust solution to try to block the security bugs that we just talked about, AppDefend is really the solution to do it. So this will provide you either, if you're not applying CPUs, it provides you long-term coverage, or if you're applying CPUs but you can't do it within a couple of days, most organizations are 90 to 100 days, AppDefend provides you that window and also provides you alerting so we know if someone's attacking it. So really, if you're trying to prevent against these web application attacks happening that we just highlighted, AppDefend is the enterprise application firewall that's designed for Oracle Business Suite. We provide protection that no other product out there provides. It prevents web application attacks. So we have a special layer that looks at SQL injection. So even if we don't know about a security vulnerability in the e-business suite, we're providing protection against those SQL injection attacks, those cross-site scripting attacks, and other known issues that we see quite often in the Oracle Business Suite. It also provides a virtual patching. So whenever there's a known Oracle Business Suite vulnerability, we provide a direct rule for that and try to block that. It also provides the same functionality as the URL firewall, but in a much more flexible, capable way to block as many modules as possible. Again, you don't want to be running 20,000 web pages, even internally, especially externally. You don't want to be, if you're running iSupplier, you just want to be running iSupplier, not Oracle Student System also. So the key is limit the focus, limit the surface area out on the internet. And AppDefend also provides some additional logging capabilities for clients who are like PCI or running credit cards, or need to know who's logging into the application and send it to another system easily. So the only solution out here to prevent some of these attacks that we've just talked about and how to protect yourself against web vulnerabilities within the Oracle Business Suite is AppDefend. So let's open it up to some questions. Phil, are there any questions?
Yeah, Steve, there are a couple. All right. First one. If we have an F5 web application firewall in front of the EBS, our security team says we are protected 100%.
Yeah, so there are some decent web application firewalls out there like the F5, and Imperva has another one. Those are very generic products, so they don't know anything about Oracle Business Suite really, and so they provide zero rules for anything that's already been patched by Oracle, and they do provide a limited protection against SQL injection cross-site scripting. The key about our AppDefend product is it's much more robust. It provides you the full Oracle Business Suite rules, provides you many rules around just misconfigurations. As an example, no other product on the market would provide you the capability to protect against like a default login. So Oracle Business Suite comes with 20 different logins like OP sysadmin, which has a default password. AppDefend will provide you that protection where no other web application firewall would. So yes, it's providing you maybe 20% protection, having a product like F5, where AppDefend can get you 80-90% protection against many different types of security vulnerabilities in eBusiness Suite.
Okay, next one. Due to business issues, our company is still running 11i and without support from Oracle. In the April 2016 CPU, there were no security bugs for 11i listed. Is this really true?
Yeah, so I think I touched briefly on that. So again, with Oracle, they do not, once they de-support something, they don't talk about it. So if we go out, and actually I think I've got, here's the April 2016 CPU. So if we go down to the Oracle Business Suite section, as you can see, the supported version column here shows that it's just 12.1 and 12.2. Most likely these vulnerabilities, and we do the analysis, so I've got it somewhere else probably, that almost all of these are at least in 12.0 and most likely in 11i. So even though it doesn't say that you're vulnerable, very high probability that you're still vulnerable in 11 11.5.10, 12.0, even though it's not listed by Oracle. And Oracle does no research. They basically said, well, you're desupported, hands off, we're not even going to worry about it. And Integrity has released security vulnerabilities to Oracle in 11.5.10 after the desupport date, and Oracle said, thanks so much, but that's not, we don't care about it anymore. So we know that there's unpatched security vulnerabilities, and Oracle could care less about it because they've moved on. So their attitude is thank you very much and good luck.
All right, next one. How many unpatched security vulnerabilities in my environment should it take for me to not sleep at night? That's a good question.
Yeah, very interesting ways to phrase it. So security vulnerabilities in Oracle Business Suite, most are high risk, especially the SQL injection ones. So as you can see here, let's just keep looking at this example. So when I look at some of these numbers, so remotely exploitable without authentication, yes, in this column here. So I see yes, 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 yes. I see base score of 9.1. So typically in this CPU, 6.9 or probably 6.9 in this case or above, these I would consider all very high risk, very damaging to your environment. So any one of these in this CPU, someone could take over your entire environment, grab all your social security numbers, cause massive amounts of damage, potentially change bank account numbers. So when you start doing your electronic funds transfers, it goes to their bank account, not. And we've seen those type of attacks where basically someone can get in, change bank account numbers, nobody catches it. There's no automated systems at your banks that if you pass them a file of bank account numbers and EFT instructions, they're not sitting there, or ETF instructions, they're not sitting there saying, oh, you just changed bank account numbers for that person. They don't really do that. So they would probably just flow out right away. So again, one of these vulnerabilities, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of the 8 here, I would not sleep at night knowing one of those 6 were in my environment, especially if I'm out on the internet. Again, there has to be a little bit of analysis which ones, if I'm on the internet, which ones might be exploitable in iSupplier. But again, in this case, the common calendar applications and the Oracle Applications Framework, those two are exploitable on the internet. Fortunately, the other 3 here are not, so at least you're safe there. But again, 1 or 2 of these vulnerabilities can be very, very powerful and damaging. And if you're not applying CPUs on a regular basis, you've got a significant risk in the environment.
All right, thank you, Steve. I think that's the end of the questions for the day. And I want to thank everybody for hanging in with us this afternoon. And be sure next month, by the way, July 19th, OEUG has asked us to repeat one of the sessions that we gave at the last Collaborative 16, and that was with EBS and PCI. Credit card security information. So be sure to join us, and that's at 1 o'clock instead of the normal 2 o'clock for us. So again, everybody, thank you very much for joining with us this afternoon, and have a great rest of the week.